Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announces his resignation outside his home in Ottawa. He'll step down when a new successor is named. The US Secretary of State throws his support behind South Korea's democratic process as investigators continue their mission to arrest impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol. And Hamas approves a list of 34 Israeli hostages to be released as part of a possible Gaza ceasefire deal. Now to our top story. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has resigned from office amid resentment from within his own Liberal Party. Trudeau made the announcement on the steps of his Ottawa home. Here is what he had to say.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
So how did it all go so wrong for the Canadian leader? Benji Haya has the backstory.
Justin Trudeau, once Canada's fresh face, the poster boy for liberalism, promising a new kind of politics.
What a mess. Yesterday was a gong show at the bottom of a dumpster fire, wrapped up in a cluster.
People are right to be angry. They've got a prime minister who's more interested in protecting his own job than defending Canadians against Trump.
The Prime Minister has lost the confidence of Canadians, lost the confidence of many of his MPs, and yesterday he lost the confidence of his Finance Minister. And no wonder, because after 9 years, this Prime Minister has broken everything.
Trudeau, the son of a previous Canadian Prime Minister, has faced a relentless and tumultuous few weeks. With the 53-year-old's popularity already plummeting over record inflation, almost 24 backbench Liberal MPs signed a letter late last year calling on him to step down, with the ruling party fearing a seismic defeat in the election scheduled for this October. Recent polling put the Liberals at just 16%, their worst pre-election standing in more than a century.
You know, it's hard not to feel happy when we're like this, among Liberals, among family, because that's what we really are, a big family. Now, like most families, sometimes we have fights around the holidays. But of course, like most families, we find our way through it.
But then came the return of this man. Donald Trump's victory has propelled him back into the limelight, with the US president-elect threatening to introduce 25% tariffs on America's neighbour to the north. Trump's publicly mocked Trudeau, belittling him as the governor of Canada, as if his country was merely a US state rather than an independent nation. The final straw, perhaps, was the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, Canada's deputy prime minister, who quit after casting doubt on whether Trudeau can effectively counter the United States' next commander-in-chief.
When people feel their economic future is in jeopardy, when they believe their children have fewer opportunities than they themselves had in their youth, that's when people are vulnerable to the demagogue who scapegoats the outsider, the other, whether it's immigrants at home or trading partners abroad.
These heady days almost a decade ago, now a world away for this latest incumbent leader to fall. Trudeau has weathered many storms, this one proving too strong to survive. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya News.
For more on this, I'm joined by Richard Johnston, Emeritus Professor at the University of British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Firstly, what challenges has Justin Trudeau been facing lately, and how did he get to the position of announcing his resignation today?
It's a layered cake. much of it is aftermath of COVID. The government of Canada actually managed COVID fairly well, but it did involve controversial choices that restricted liberties. We had an insurrectionist episode that dramatized the divisions. The party suffers from the fact that there's now a clear, plausible alternative, and the choice of Pierre Poilievre as leader of the Conservative Party distilled some of that. That's now 2 years ago. And then this year has been just kind of shabby rather than traumatic. Mismanagement at the margins. And then with Trump's election, of course, we're now in the firing line, and we don't actually have a credible government to deal with the president-elect. And then finally, as Chrystia Freeland's statement that you had in your video clip dramatized, there are divisions inside the party, and finally she has crystallized those and basically blown the matter wide open.
So you said, Richard, it's a layered cake, it's been shabby, the government. Who is likely to replace Trudeau, and what does this process actually look like?
Well, those are two questions, and the answer to the second one may help determine the answer to the first. We don't really know what the process will look like. There is an official process, but it's quite cumbersome, and in the normal course of events would take several months to unfold. The Prime Minister essentially bought his party 2 months worth of time, or actually effectively less than that. It will be some kind of consultation with the paid-up membership of the party, I assume. The Prime Minister did say he wanted it to be inclusive, pan-Canadian, and competitive. So it'll probably be a shortened version of a universal vote amongst those people who are willing to sign up as Liberals. The votes will be counted by parliamentary constituency, so it's not as if some region will outbalance the other for any reason other than it's larger. Who comes in may partly depend on the terms of entry. There will have to be some sort of indication of backing up front. One of the big questions is whether Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England, very credible economic figure, and who is thought by some to be the party's potential savior. One question is whether he will enter. If he enters, whether he'll win. And if he wins, whether he will be nothing more than a sacrificial lamb whose future will be compromised by this decision. But really, it's an open question.
Yes, indeed. Mark Carney, yes, long speculated. But if the new Prime Minister comes in, is he not going to face the challenges that Justin Trudeau has been facing? Because you touched on Donald Trump there and the tariffs that he wants to slap on Canada, and things have been difficult. Is it going to be any different with somebody new in power?
Not really. The timelines are short. Even if they succeed in coming up with a credible candidate, they're going to face confidence votes in Parliament as soon as it resumes. There'll have to be a throne speech and a program laid out at the end of March. The Parliament will have to provide some kind of supply, that is basically money from the Treasury to run the government. But an election is imminent anyway. If it isn't in the spring, it'll be in the autumn. So this is a government with a very short timeline, and even with a new leader, not a lot of credibility as the probable government going forward beyond sometime this year.
So do you think the Liberals stand any chance in winning these elections, as you mentioned, coming up in October? And we know that Trudeau did point to this in his speech.
I think the answer is basically no. I think the real question is, can they recover at least some of the ground that they've lost so that they can be a credible opposition in Parliament and not an institution that lies essentially shattered? So it's really a matter, I think, of saving some of the bacon, so to speak, rather than actually winning the next election.
Richard Johnston, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the University of British Columbia. Thank you so much for your insights this evening.
Not at all. Bye-bye.
Now, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has expressed confidence in ally South Korea's handling of an ongoing political crisis that has seen the country's impeached president refuse to step down. Blinken's visit also coincided with North Korea firing a ballistic missile, as Nina Puya reports.
Shortly after Antony Blinken met South Korean acting President Choi Sang-mok in Seoul on Monday, Pyongyang fired what is believed to be an intermediate-range ballistic missile. The missile flew nearly 700 miles before landing in the sea between the Korean peninsula and Japan. The U.S. Secretary of State called it yet another violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
We have sought to engage the DPRK and multiple efforts to sit down, to talk without any preconditions. We communicated that on many occasions. We've done it privately, we've done it publicly. And the only response effectively we've gotten has been more and more provocative actions, including the missile launches.
Monday's launch was the first in 2 months and came as Secretary Blinken once again expressed concern over the growing alliance between Pyongyang and Moscow after they signed a defense pact last year.
Now, we have reason to believe that Moscow intends to share advanced space and satellite technology with Pyongyang, and that Putin may be close to reversing a decades-long policy by Russia and accepting DPRK's nuclear weapons program.
Blinken is visiting Seoul as part of his last foreign trip before Trump's inauguration, and he used this visit to express confidence in key ally South Korea's political future.
The United States has full confidence in South Korea's institutions, and we reaffirm our unwavering support for the Korean people as they work tirelessly to uphold those institutions.
On Monday, supporters of impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol waved South Korean and American flags during a protest near the presidential residence. Last week, investigators tried and failed to arrest President Yoon after a 6-hour-long standoff with his security team. This weekend, South Korea's presidential residence was newly fortified with barbed wire and barricaded with buses. Outside, Yoon supporters continue to rally. Yoon is the first South Korean president to face arrest. He's being probed on insurrection charges after trying and failing to bring in martial law last month, citing a threat from North Korea. Investigators say they have asked for an extension of the arrest warrant, but have not confirmed how long the extension will last. Blinken says Washington has expressed, quote, serious concerns to Seoul over some of Yoon's actions. Yoon supporters have said they will continue to rally and have called this battle a battle for freedom. Neha Punya, Al Arabiya News.
Let's get the Washington reaction now from our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, thanks so much for joining me this evening. Firstly, Antony Blinken has been in support of the impeachment of Yoon. What else has he been saying during his trip to the region today?
Yeah, Leigh Ann, very interesting, the timing of this trip. Of course, we've seen relations between Washington and Seoul really grow during the Biden administration's last 4 years. We've also seen a growing relation between the two US allies of South Korea and Japan. Those two countries overcoming some long-running differences. We saw the 2023 landmark three-way summit here in Camp David just a year or so back. So Antony Blinken here very much showing that there is that continued support from the United States for what's currently taking place in South Korea. And as we heard there in Neha's package, there was that firing of a ballistic missile timed to coincide with Antony Blinken's trip. Antony Blinken saying that there was that ironclad commitment from Washington to defend South Korea. Also speaking about that warming of relations between North Korea and Russia, warning that those two countries mustn't engage in that expanding of space cooperation. But he also spoke about the conflict in the Middle East, in particular the peace deal that's been rumbling away in the background for many, many months, not reaching a conclusion between Israel and Hamas. And he warned that despite the best efforts of the Biden administration, that deal might not get done before Joe Biden leaves office in exactly 2 weeks' time. He said that the Biden administration would work every minute of every day, and he said, we very much want to bring it over the finish line in the next 2 weeks. But he did say that despite being hopeful of an agreement at some point in the future, it may not happen in this next 2 weeks.
So, Nick, there's been support for Yoon by people who seem to have been influenced by Trump voters. Let's be realistic. These are Blinken's final days in office. We all know Trump's administration is coming in very soon. When do you think that they'll possibly go to South Korea? And do you think that they'll have South Korea will get the same support from a Trump administration?
Well, it'll be very interesting to see how this one plays out, because there were two sides to the last Trump presidency. We certainly saw very warm relations between President Trump and then South Korea's President Moon Jae-in. He even visited South Korea back in 2019. But bear in mind that that was, of course, 3 years into Donald Trump's presidency. So it took a little while for him to get there. So warm relations in the past, but in the run-up to last year's US presidential election, Donald Trump was threatening South Korea, saying that they should be paying around $10 billion a year to have US troops stationed in South Korea, essentially ready in case anything happens with its relations with its northern neighbour. He is, of course, saying that $10 billion would be about 10 times the amount that South Korea currently pays. So it's unclear whether or not we could see worsening relations between the US and South Korea after a period of warm relations. And then there's also a question of what Donald Trump might do with North Korea. During his first term in office, there was certainly that buddy-buddy warm relationship between him and North Korea's leader. We even saw several summits and Donald Trump stepping foot inside North Korea, crossing the DMZ from South Korea into North Korea. It's unclear whether he will try and reinvigorate that relationship with Kim Jong-un. If he does, though, I think it will be very much a change in policy that we've seen in recent years. The US has been keeping North Korea at arm's length during the Biden administration. We could, of course, see a turnaround under Donald Trump. Well, you can't really rule out anything when it comes to Donald Trump and foreign policy.
Speaking of the incoming Trump government, Joe Biden has announced the banning of new offshore oil and gas drilling along America's coastline. Trump has made his plans for drilling really, really clear. We've heard him say, drill, baby, drill, part of his motto. Will we see this Biden policy ditched in a couple of weeks' time as soon as Trump takes office? I know Biden wants it to be part of his climate legacy.
Yeah, very much so. And Joe Biden making no secret of that idea of trying to shore up his climate change legacy. He's enacted a raft of policies during his time in office, this one coming in the dying weeks of his administration. And it is a huge executive order. It effectively covers the whole of the US coastline, the East Coast, the West Coast, part of the Gulf of Mexico, even up into the Bering Strait of Alaska. However, it could be particularly difficult for Donald Trump to overturn this one, because Joe Biden has used a Lands Act dating back to 1953, a rather obscure Lands Act, to put this executive order through. And in this Lands Act provision, it means that no incoming or future president can overturn these types of executive orders. Making it even more challenging is the fact that Joe Biden has put no end date on when this ban could potentially be lifted. So Donald Trump wants to lift it, but it's unclear if he would be able to. There could potentially be legal challenges. The Trump team putting out a statement a short while ago criticising this decision, saying it was a disgraceful decision, saying it was political revenge on the American people, saying that Donald Trump, by winning the election, had been given a mandate to, as he put it, once again using that catchphrase, to drill, baby, drill. He wants to ramp up domestic production of oil and gas. This new executive order by Joe Biden, 2 weeks before he leaves office, could make it a little bit harder for the incoming president.
Nick Harper, fantastic reporting from Washington. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's almost been a month since the fall of Assad's government in Syria, when the former president fled Damascus for refuge in Russia. Today, former Syrian media chief Kamal Saka has told Al Arabiya about Assad's escape route and his request to Putin. Here's what he had to say.
Bashar al-Assad told you that a meeting is to occur at Hammaim base.
Yes.
Do you think this was his prelude to escape route?
I imagine, yes.
Who did he choose to escape with him?
The Minister of Presidential Affairs of Syria, Mansour Azam, the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Staff, and also his personal aide, that's for sure. Beyond that, I don't know.
It's said that his son was with him.
Yes, for sure. Hafez and Karim. Karim returned with us on the same plane we took from Moscow a week before. As for Hafez, I don't know when he arrived. Perhaps he came 2 days later.
So, did you meet any of his family members at the palace within 72 hours?
No, they don't come to the palace. No.
What about the escape route and arrival at Hammaim?
I imagine it was from Damascus Airport via a private plane, taking the southern bypass road and then the airport road to reach the airport. This operation, yes, was secured by the Russian side because the Russian military attaché met with Assad in the final hours, not hours, but the final 2 hours. We're talking after 11 p.m. until midnight, or just after midnight. He met with him to secure the escape operation. So the departure was from the residence.
He met him at the palace, the Russian military attaché?
Yes, at the palace. At the palace. Yes. The departure was to Damascus International Airport, then to Hammaim Airport. Of course, it wasn't necessarily that a plane was ready immediately after arriving at Hammaim. No. My information suggests that he stayed at the base for several hours until the plane was secured, prepared, and its takeoff and flight to Moscow were ensured. Everyone took a step back. What did President Putin, according to Bashar al-Assad? He said that President Putin immediately contacted his chief of staff and requested that preparations be made for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to transport anything needed through the Hammaim base from Iran to Syria.
Yes.
What happened? And we're talking about November 29th, more than a week before the regime fell. What happened was the opposite, meaning Bashar al-Assad's request to Putin was for him to personally handle the secure aerial transportation necessary to deliver military aid to support or stop the advance of the Syrian opposition. But what happened is that the Iranians told Bashar al-Assad that they had not received any signals or confirmations that they could move Iranian aircraft to the Hammaim base, cross Iraqi airspace, and land at Hammaim. The question was redirected to Moscow. No answer came. Despite the fact that, according to Bashar al-Assad, Putin allegedly contacted his chief of staff in front of him. However, the logical explanation for what happened is...
Was it a trick by Putin?
There's no other explanation. There's no other explanation.
Now, 34 Israeli hostages could be returned as part of a potential Gaza ceasefire deal, according to Hamas. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has said Hamas has not provided a hostage list at this current time. It comes after a weekend of discussions regarding a halt to fighting and bringing those held captive home. Let's go live to Tel Aviv for the latest and speak to our correspondent there, Trent Murray. Trent, good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us. Trent, remind us how many hostages are currently being held by Hamas and who have the group approved for release?
Well, Leigh Ann, of the 250 Israeli hostages that were originally taken back on October 7th, it is thought that around 100 of them are still being held within the Gaza Strip. It is difficult to get an exact number because there are questions over their whereabouts, their welfare, and also who exactly is holding them. We know Hamas is holding a number of them, but also other groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad are thought to be holding a number of those captives. Now, this recent list which has been put forward is part of that 100 or so which are still being held there. It should be said that the Israeli government believes that around a third of them have now died in the Gaza Strip since they were being held there. But overall, it is, of course, still a very significant number, which is why they are so crucial to these ongoing ceasefire negotiations. We know that Hamas is using these hostages as part of their talks to try and ensure the Israelis end their permanent military presence in Gaza, and that is why we've seen many sort of ceasefire negotiations in the past kind of collapse at the last minute. We do know that out of that number there was over 109 released. That was earlier last year, when you might recall there was a ceasefire deal done then. Certainly for many of the families here in Israel, there is hope that that same sort of deal could be resurrected in order to try and get some of these people home.
Trent, Benjamin Netanyahu's office has not confirmed they have received this list from Hamas. Was this not part of the ongoing ceasefire talks which did take place over the weekend?
Look, like in so many of these situations, it is a little bit of they said type situation. Hamas is saying that this list of 34 hostages that it has put forward are ones that they are able to release as part of an immediate ceasefire deal. These are people aged all the way from 1 year old right through to 85. But what the Israeli government is saying, and I will read the statement from them, is that contrary to what was claimed, Hamas has yet to provide a list of hostages. The hostage list which was released in the media today was not provided to Israel by Hamas, but was originally transferred from Israel to the mediators back in July of 2024. What we should also say is that Israel is saying out of that list, they've had questions over whether all of those people are still alive. They say Hamas has not given any guarantees over whether indeed that is the case. But right now we know, despite those disagreements, there is just a lot of intense focus on trying to bring the two sides together, because of course for the hostage families, they want their loved ones home, and for the people of Gaza who have been under this siege now for well over 14 months, we know the humanitarian situation continues to be desperate. In fact, just before coming on air, yet another warning from aid agencies. The World Food Programme this time, they say one of their cars was fired at by Israeli forces today. They have condemned that, and they've even released some photos showing bullet holes on that UN SUV.
Trent, we know Joe Biden has urged Hamas to agree a deal. You're just talking about it. We've heard lots about these ceasefires, but they've never actually come through. Do you think that by the time Trump's inauguration comes round on the 20th of January, we could have any breakthrough? Are you hearing any positive connotations about this on the ground at all?
Well, look, I think in many ways this is being looked at from the American perspective through the prism of political legacy. We, of course, know Joe Biden's days in the White House are fast coming to an end. For his legacy, he would love to see a deal get done. We heard that from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken today on his final overseas trip as the Secretary while he was in South Korea. He said they were doing all they could to get this over the line within the next 2 weeks. That is when their time will come to an end. But from the flip side, you can imagine if you were from President Trump's perspective and his incoming administration, well, what better way to kick off your sort of Middle East foreign policy agenda by saying you were able to secure a ceasefire in the opening days of the Trump White House? I mean, that is just the very kind of crude political nature of all of this. Caught in the middle of it, of course, millions of civilians in Gaza and over 100 families here in Israel waiting to get their loved ones home. It's an incredibly difficult situation.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Elon Musk has called out the leader of Britain's right-wing party Reform UK, claiming Nigel Farage doesn't have what it takes. The very public withdrawal of support comes hours after Farage has described Elon Musk as a friend. Today, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer responded to Musk's criticisms of how the UK had handled grooming gangs after the tech tycoon backed calls for a national inquiry. A state of emergency remains in 7 states in the US, where over 60 million Americans continue to battle with extreme weather. Storm Blair has led to thousands of flights being delayed or cancelled. Many roads cut off and some schools shut off too as a result. Kansas is one of the worst areas hit, with Missouri, Kentucky and Virginia also affected. Now, a 276-kilogram tuna has sold for more than £1 million at the Toyosu fish market in Tokyo. The fish, which weighs the same as a motorbike, was bought by Michelin star sushi restaurateurs, the Odira Group and the wholesaler Yamayaki. The sale is the second highest price ever paid at the annual New Year auction at Toyosu Fish Market, and where the first tuna purchase is always believed to bring good fortune. And the world's oldest living person is a 116-year-old Brazilian nun. Sister Ica Canabero, who was born on the 8th of June 1908, lives in a retirement home in southern Brazil. Ms. Canabero is a passionate football fan, and she credits her long life to her Catholic faith. The former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has gone on trial in Paris. He's accused of accepting millions of dollars in illegal campaign financing from Gaddafi's regime in Libya and denies the charges, saying the allegations are part of a conspiracy against him. Ross Cullen has this report.
For the 5th time in 5 years, Nicolas Sarkozy has gone on trial in France. The former president's latest court case is about allegations that he accepted some $51 million from the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Prosecutors argue that Sarkozy and Colonel Gaddafi formed a secret pact. Sarkozy would receive millions in financial support for his upcoming election, and Gaddafi would get help to rehabilitate his image on the world stage. Sarkozy won the French presidential vote in 2007 and served 1 term till 2012. The 69-year-old has twice been convicted of separate crimes since leaving office. In December, he lost an appeal against a jail term for a corruption conviction. He will serve that sentence by wearing an electronic bracelet. Sarkozy's legal team say the Gaddafi case is a, quote, artificial construction dreamed up by the prosecution. 12 others are on trial alongside the former president, including 3 ex-ministers. All the defendants, including Nicolas Sarkozy, deny the charges.
If he is found guilty, Nicolas Sarkozy could face up to 10 years in prison. The trial is expected to conclude in early April. Ross Cullen, Al Arabiya News, Paris.
Let's take a look at the top business news. Japan's Nippon Steel may revamp its growth strategy after President Joe Biden blocked its proposed $15 billion acquisition of U.S. steel. The company's shares fell slightly today after Biden rejected the deal, citing national security concerns. Japan's largest business lobby says the decision was a cause for concern regarding future U.S. investment. Now, oil prices are holding steady at their highest level since mid-October as cold weather across Europe and the US increases demand. Brent and WTI are also trading higher on expectations of tighter sanctions on Iranian and Russian oil exports. Brent crude gaining 0.3%, trading at around $76.73 a barrel today, while WTI is up around the same amount, trading at $74.19 a barrel. Now to some sports news, and Japan's Hideki Matsuyama has won the PGA Tour opener in Hawaii with a record 35 under par. The 2001 Masters champion carded a final round of 65 to make history on the Plantation course in Kapalua. He beat the previous record of 34 under, and that was set by Cameron Smith on the very same course in 2002. And Manchester United battled Liverpool to draw 2-2 in a game that was almost postponed due to heavy snow in the north of England. United demonstrated the spirit that has been missing under the new manager Ruben Amorim to earn a point at Anfield. Now, Mo Salah equalled Thierry Henry's tally of 175 Premier League goals from the penalty spot. Now, a reminder of today's top stories. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announces his resignation outside his home in Ottawa. He'll step down when a new successor is named. The US Secretary of State throws his support behind South Korea's democratic process as investigators continue their mission to arrest impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol. And Hamas approves a list of 34 Israeli hostages to be released as part of a possible Gaza ceasefire deal. That's all from us on W News. Thanks so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.